And get started. A couple of things. One, the postponement from yesterday kind of played havoc with the committee's attendance. So we're not going to have enough folks here today to call an official quorum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead this site walk just as a citizen, and I'll present it to the committee in the public input session during our meeting on July 6th. Shouldn't change anything that we're going to cover today. If you have any questions, any input, feel free to express it, talk about it. We're going to cover off on everything we would have covered off anyway. It's just a technicality. There is a sign-in sheet going around. If you wouldn't mind just making sure that you sign in with at least your address. And if you would like to be put on our email list, please include your email list on that as well. We have copies of the site plan here. If anybody needs a copy, I have a box of them here, thanks to Casey Ferreira from Howard Stein Hudson. And we also have two of our committee members here, if you guys would introduce yourselves.
Oh, sure. I'm Kate Gleisberg.
And I'm Alice Johannan.
And the other members that aren't able to be here today are Adele Stavis, Chris Crafts, Bill Arrington, and Maggie Marinowski. So just so you know. In terms of process, so you understand what our process is, we will next meet on July 6th, and at that meeting we'll take a vote on which features we're going to include and where the various locations would be. So that July 6th meeting is kind of important, where we've been gathering input both at the Tuesday night public input session and then today. At the end of the meeting today, I'd like to pass around a one-question comment survey. If you would just mind taking the time to fill it out, it would be very helpful to us. And if somebody will remind me to pass it out, I'd appreciate it too, because I tend to forget things in these meetings. So that would be very helpful. We received comments at the last public input session. We're going to discuss those at the meeting, and then we'll discuss whatever we collect today as well. And then as well, the other committee members will review the video, so everybody will be on the same page. Excuse me. Any questions on process? David?
One question on the process. You said that it's likely the town will not fund the entire park at one time. When do you think you will have an idea of what will be the priority list?
So our recommendation is going to be that the town be in charge of the implementation schedule in terms of construction and stuff, because they'll be doing a lot of that work, as well as the funding, because that's really the scope of their work. I had an email conversation with the town manager and asked him if he felt like that, well, let me take a step back. One of our recommendations is that the priority be the playground, that the replacement of the playground be really the first priority. And so I asked the town manager if it would be realistic to expect that $400,000 budget that we've developed could be funded at fall town meeting in October. He said that it potentially could be funded, but nothing above that, because there's other things that are on the shelf for fall town meeting. So the optimistic sense that I got was that we could potentially start work on the playground, start the bid process in the fall, prep the site in winter, right, and then start the actual installation in the spring. That's an optimistic timeline, but at least one that we're kind of trying to run with.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Great. So we'll start here. We have sort of designated this area in here as a welcome community area. And what we have here is a trail that'll if you look at the map, the parking lot right here on the edge over here gets extended out a little bit by 3 or 4 parking spaces. There would be a shade structure with 2 porta potties underneath it, right about where the bike path is, the bike stand is now. Then the trail would come across here and then connect in with Friendship Park, and then as well connect down to the lower brick walkway that's down in that area. So you see we kind of have a little bit of a triangular area set up in between the different pathways. And I'll pass around, within this Welcome Center, some of the things we've talked about. I'll pass around the images that we've included. I only have 2 copies if you guys wouldn't mind sharing. These are the images that we have collected for the master plan document. And a couple of the things that we've kind of pointed out that we thought would be neat to make this welcome area is an information kiosk that would be a place that people could go to get information about the trails and all the other things that are going on in the park, as well as incorporating the smaller store into the area as well with putting a covered bridge style covering over the little small bridge that would then match the Friendship Park entry, which we would hope to reuse as well. Within this area, we talked about potentially having I think it's called the meditation labyrinth, but it's kind of a circular area. Just 1 second, Jim, and I'll get to you. It's kind of a circular area, low, nothing high, but it gives kids and people sort of the opportunity to just kind of walk around and collect their thoughts. And I think that was it for the, oh, and then a stone marker. So a stone marker with sort of a carved Roberts Field in it, and then sort of stone seating. So again, trying to kind of bring that natural part of the park into the area. Jim, you had a question?
Can you hang on? Can you hang on 1 second? We'll just come get your clarification, Jim. The covered bridge that you're proposing, or that's on the idea block, have you had any discussions with current ownership on that? Because that's private property on the other side.
So thank you. Did everybody get a chance to see the images? And the images on this, the second half of this, are for a nature scavenger hunt that we'll talk about in a second as well. The property lines as they've been defined to us, it's basically splits that little creek right there. So that half the creek is private property and the other half is town property. The store is currently up for sale. It's been up for sale for a while. We had a conversation with the real estate agent who is listing the property, and he indicated that he was very excited about the ideas that we're talking about with the covered bridge and the labyrinth and the welcome center and tying into that. And he felt like, as best he could, he felt like that the potential buyers would be excited by something like that. You know, it's all contingent upon someone buying it and liking it. It would have to be a project that would be worked out with between both.
Well, there would be an easement, right? Isn't there an easement required?
I would guess, yeah. So all those things would have to be worked out.
Maintenance of it, so I would admit.
I'm sorry?
Somebody's going to have to be responsible for the ongoing maintenance of it, so I would
Correct.
think that there's going to have to be an easement granted to the town to have ownership of the piece that ties into the private property.
Or at least a memorandum of understanding of who would be responsible for what, right? So, and once again, and I think you'll find that what we've done is we've tried to create a plan that has a lot of detail in it, and that if we're not able to get everything implemented at one time, you know, Roberts Field has a rich history of volunteers. I mean, a lot of these structures that are out here, like the skate shack and, you know, all of these exercise circuit machines, and there's a bunch of other stuff too, the nature trails, were all built by volunteers. So the idea is that we'll have this plan, and then if we can find a volunteer group that wants to take on a particular project, then we'll help them go through that process and then get those projects built. And that would be a good example of something. The shade structure for the bathroom might be a good Eagle Scout project, for instance, you know, so.
Can I ask just one other small question?
Yes.
Can we get your question, Jim? Hang on. Sorry, Jim. We're just so that it's on the record.
The bike rack that's here now,
Yes.
I don't see it on the print as being relocated. Is it going to be relocated somewhere different in the park?
So I don't know if it'll be that particular bike rack or this bike rack, but the plan calls to reuse the bike racks that are here in the park now in different spots. They should be on the plan. They may just be so small that they're not visible, but if they're not, they will be. And the idea is to put the bike racks near areas where, you know, obviously kids would park them. And like the bathrooms would be one of the spots. Friendship Park would be one. And then I believe we have one over by the hardscape area as well. And if it's not on there, it's not. It's just an oversight. It should be. It's in the budget, and it's in the budget as being reused. The DPW also has some bikes in their storage that they could bike racks that they could use here as well.
I'm not seeing it in the plan, so you might want to just read it.
Okay, we will do that. Thank you for calling that out. So, any questions on the welcome center, welcome area? So let's, if you don't mind, let's take a walk into the playground just to kind of, you can get a feel for sort of how the layout is now and get a feel for the condition. And just to kind of tell you how we've constructed it, the committee's not really qualified, obviously, to design the playground. That's something that a professional would need to do. And so what we've done is we've tried to create an overall budget that would allow for the creation of a universal access, more modern type playground that would be a combination of manufactured natural play structures, so play structures that may look more like trees or have that kind of natural component to it. It would also have a mix of manufactured natural play structures as well as natural landform type play structures that would we could probably have sort of a grassy footprint surface, or have a mulch type footprint surface. So we've also defined the maximum footprint of the playground. So in doing that, that's going to allow the designer who will design it as part of the bid process to say, okay, this will fit there and that'll fit there, and then we can kind of shrink down the footprint where we need to. But at least it sets the parameters for where they can start the work. Hi.
Hi, just a quick question about the amount of expansion on the playground. What's the difference between the existing and the new?
So the existing playground is a great question. Is about 1/3 of an acre now, the actual footprint itself, and you can see that most of the play structures are all kind of concentrated into one area. The maximum footprint that we've defined is actually 0.89 acres. So roughly it's going from 1/3 of an acre to a full acre. And again, that's just a maximum footprint to give the designer a place to design the pieces. Because for instance, using the natural landforms, if we do use grass, we're going to have the ability to segregate off that area so that the DPW can go in and mow it safely without hurting the kids. So we'll have to have some sort of a divide between those things that can have it shut down and shut off. Then we'll also have probably an area that would be include a poured in place rubber surface so that it could have universal access, and that would have ramps and stuff too. So there's different pieces and parts. The other part of the puzzle is going to be excuse me, is going to be trying to minimize the sound drift from the playground off into the abutters. So one of the expectations for the design process is that the structures will be located where high use structures are as far away from where the sound will travel back as they can be. Or if we can put stuff in between to kind of break up the sound, that's one of the goals as well. Yes.
Why 2 baseball diamonds in a lacrosse field instead of a baseball diamond, a football field, and a soccer field, especially where soccer is kind of like the sport of the world?
Yeah. So early on, we decided that we needed to talk with potential park stakeholders and to find people that were currently and were willing to potentially in the future use the park as part of their organizational needs. Chelmsford Youth Lacrosse is very interested in using the lacrosse field for their organization, as is Chelmsford Youth Baseball. And both of those organizations have used it for a number of years. Chelmsford Youth Soccer wasn't interested in using it as a field, so what we've done is we've basically dedicated the field as a lacrosse field, but it's going to be sized so that it can be used for soccer or football or whatnot. It's the same standard field. The 2 field is a question that we can that was brought up at the public input session, and we can talk about that more maybe when we get. Yeah, that would be kind of one of the goals that we had in developing this plan was to keep the maintenance on the town at a low and to keep the cost for the maintenance at a low too. And a pool, I think, would kind of fly in the face of that. At least I think that was the will of the committee. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and we have our 4th member here from the committee, Adele Davis. So I'm going to go ahead and call this site walk into official order. So we're officially on a committee site walk now. So thank you, Adele. Yes.
Have you all made a decision on what kind of surface you want for the playground?
We haven't made a specific decision, but what we have tried to do is to include costs for surfaces that we think would make sense for the playground, that allows us to create a budget so that the designer then can take that number and then sort of work within it. Like I said, we're not experts in playgrounds, so there may be some surface that makes a ton of sense that we just haven't really considered. And we feel like a playground expert who's going to be, the town will create a bid, and then all these folks will hopefully provide a bid proposal, and then they'll include those things in that. One of the things just to note is that, we did a park user survey back in January of 2016. And one of the things that came across, very loud and clear was that people wanted a bigger playground and they wanted a more modern playground, more updated, and they wanted to see universal access. And that really, universal access really requires poured-in-place rubber to have things pull up to it, to get underneath it and to get to the things. The unfortunate part is that poured-in-place rubber requires maintenance every 1 to 2 years. It needs to be recoated, and it only has an 8-year guaranteed life. Usually 7 to 8 years. So it's 5 times more expensive than mulch. So it's expensive in the front end, expensive in the back end, and expensive in the middle. But it's also one of the things. Yes, absolutely.
The universal access was my thing. We not only have children who can't use the playground, we have parents who can't supervise at the playground because they can't get around the structures. And the idea for the park is to make it usable from everyone from 1 to 91 or 101. And you have a lot of grandparents who either babysit or have custody of their grandchildren. So they need to be able to get into the play structures as well. So we're very dedicated to the notion of universal access. The very best accessible playgrounds are all rubber cement. It's the poured-in-place rubber. It's soft. It's smooth for wheelchairs and for people on crutches. The problem is that it's not ideal for the north. So we've got to talk with more experts to see, is there a better surface? Do we have to, is it best used in a limited way? Or is there a way we can mix different surfaces that will still retain the accessibility, but also the safety? So we're kind of in the middle there, but we're very dedicated to making this playground accessible to everyone.
Yeah, that sounds great. I was just thinking, depending on the surface, I would think that you'd have different permeability issues, and an issue for the abutters might be all of a sudden there's a ton of runoff.
That is already being considered as part of the plan. We have rain gardens going in to handle, we'll have drainage tubes heading towards things, so all of that is being handled within the plan.
So one of the things, one of our overall criteria for selection and one of our overall goals is to minimize the impact on abutters, and one of those things is through the sound mitigation. So you'll see on the plan that adjacent on that side of the playground, we've added a berm and then some type of sound mitigating landscaping that would go along that edge to help cut that down, and then that would be tied into the irrigation system, and we'd have a drip line on that as well. So we'd have the water to help for those trees. Jim.
I know you talked a little bit about the expansion of the playground, which is great. Can you give us an idea of how far that will come out this way? This, and I know this isn't to scale, but this says it's to be relocated in the plan.
Right.
And it looks like it's going to get relocated out here. Do we know where the edge of the playground area will go to?
It's so the max. Now I want to keep referring to it as the maximum footprint because it's not a final defined footprint. It's a maximum footprint for the designer to work with to build. But basically, it's the edge of the fencing right there on the baseball park, right? On the
dugout fencing? Or the
yes, the infield fencing,
okay.
Right? So it's basically there. It comes up to about here. And the idea of bringing it up this far was to try to incorporate these trees into the playground, right? So that was one of our goals, was to get the fence line out of the root zone of the trees, and then on that side it's roughly 60 feet. Is that what? Or it was 60 feet, I believe, from the property line. And then when we get in the back, I can show you, but it's roughly on the other side of the mulch pile that's in the back there.
In from David and Amanda's
Yeah,
side
to
the edge of the playground?
I believe that's what it is. No, sorry, it's 30 feet. 30 feet.
Do you have any sense of what it is today?
If you look at the drawing, you can see the faint gray line of the existing playground fence, and looks to me to be about 60 to 70 feet from this edge over here. You can see where the line is marked on the plan. Any other questions? So, yes.
Has there been a commitment from the town for maintenance of this once it's put up, or is it just going to be let go like this was?
It's a great question. So maintenance has been a big question from the beginning of the process. Two recommendations that we have in the master plan are, one, that a Roberts Field Advisory Board be created. That advisory board is going to have a number of different responsibilities, and we'll talk through those as we move along. One being trying to find cost-sharing opportunities, but the biggest thing is the creation of a maintenance plan, a detailed maintenance plan for the park. And in that plan, we'll define not only the standards that we have for the upkeep of each individual feature, but also who's going to be responsible for that. And in the master plan, we've also recommended that the town sign memorandums of understandings with stakeholders to define who's responsible for what, and so that we can kind of move forward from there. So I think we've tried to tackle and address that, and with the advisory board, I think we can do that. Thank you. Any other questions? So before we move into the playground, I just wanted to give you another page of images. And these are just sort of random images that we found that we felt like expressed some of the types of structures or surfaces and things that we, at least as a committee, were thinking through and thinking about. So hopefully it'll kind of help to show some of the thoughts that we have. All right, so we're just going to walk through the playground. There's kids playing today, so we'll try to be friendly towards them. Let's go on that side. There's one thing that I do want to show out when we'll be closer to y'all's property, and then we can also talk about the bittersweet issue as well. If you guys want to grab some shade, feel free. We can move over. Just a couple of things to point out here, and if you haven't had a chance to look at the pictures, hopefully they'll get around to you. This part of the playground, I think, was sort of defined as maybe the toddler section of the playground, and we feel like it's important to have a dedicated toddler section, but we'd like to have a segregated toddler section as much as we can as well. That would keep kind of the kids in place, and that's going to be one of our expectations for the master plan. The other thing that I wanted to point out is sort of the condition of the park. So the park has, when it was built, because of the wood, steel, and plastic structures, has about a 20 to 25 year lifespan. So we're past the end of that, and the DPW made the determination that the playground needed to be replaced. So and that was really the impetus for starting the committee. And over the years, things have changed. The DPW has tried to stay on top of maintaining and getting rid of some of the more dangerous structures, and you can see like the sandbox here looks a lot different than it used to look 5 or 10 years ago. There were a lot of slides that came off and some other things, but those things, as they deteriorated, slowly got kind of chipped away and whittled away. And once again, the only thing that's really slated for reuse within the fenced area is the picnic tables, and even those are going to need some attention before they get reused. Yes, question?
What about the trees here? Are the trees coming down?
Absolutely not. Oh, you want to say something to that?
No. Okay. Okay, so you said the trees are going to stay for shade and things like that.
Yes, and so what we did was we've prepared. We have an arborist that's helped us with preparing the project, and he's gone with and inventoried all of the major trees within the park, especially these, and then on the outskirts of the park that may be affected by construction. So part of our master plan is going to include that inventory that has size, root zone, condition.
An educational impact. That these are samples of a particular tree, and we're going to be putting labels at the more significant trees so that the kids can learn to identify, and just under the auspices of trying to keep this connected to the nature trails that are behind, that this is a natural zone and it's up to us to take care of it and learn about it.
On that original, the first picture sheet that we handed out on the right-hand side, there were a number of images that sort of might help to define what that natural scavenger hunt theme would be. You know, we had imprints of animal prints. We could have a list of 10 perennials or 10 trees to go and find, and we could have a little card made for each one of those, and then a parent could scan that card and it would pull up a web page and to get more information. And the idea being that we would engage the children with that, and we'd have we could in that same area we could have sensory things with with grasses and stuff for kids to touch, and just those are the types of activities that we're really trying to leverage. And that'll give, not only will the Friendship Park have a natural theme, but the entire park will as well. So we're trying to kind of create a whole in terms of theme here. The trees. So going back to the maintenance plan, we'll not only have standards defined for maintaining features, but we'll also have a lot of information about how to properly maintain the trees and the plants in the park as well. And specifically for the construction process, we have a pretty extensive list of tree protection guidelines, and there's a tree in the back that Jim, our arborist, has marked for us that'll show you sort of the tree protection critical root zone that in the guidelines says that we should have fenced off, and certain other things that can and can't happen around it. Any questions? Great. We're just going to walk this way. One thing that I wanted to point out is that this area, this kind of openish area in through here that's green with the little twisty vines coming up, 90% of what you see in there is bittersweet. And that was mowed flat in February, late February, early March. And it's important to note because you can see how quickly and how pervasive that stuff is. And one of our concerns is that we really need to get a handle on that, because for one thing, if we do sound mitigation landscaping, if we don't control that, it's just going to choke it out and kill it. So one of our recommendations is to create a 3 to 5 year plan to address the bittersweet, both here on that side of the pond and then in the back of the area as well. Any questions?
Even along the fence here.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Invasive species.
Yes, very much so. Any questions? All right, we're going to move along this way, Ben. So, this is the stuff that we're talking about, bittersweet. Just so everybody's very clear on what it is. It's these little wispy things that are growing up out of here, and you can kind of see what happens. If you look off into the distance, you can see how the vines grow up into the canopies of the trees. And so what ends up happening is they grow up, it gets really heavy and dense in the top. It drowns out the ability of the plant to grow leaves, and then weakens it, and then eventually it blows over and kills the tree. And it's a pretty quick process, unfortunately. The other sort of bad thing about bittersweet is that once you mow it and open it up, it actually grows back stronger because it has more access to sunlight, and it's easy. It fights other plants. It's not really a fair fight, but it fights other plants for space and light. So part of that process, part of our plan is to incorporate this and to fight this in a 3 to 5 year plan. And then that back there is David's house and yard, correct? Let's see, yeah. David and Amanda's house and property is back behind there where the garage is. Any questions on the bittersweet? Yes?
So with a 3 to 5 year plan, does it probably include some herbicide treatments over time, plus a combination of, digging it out and all that, is that correct?
Right. So what we did was we spoke with several different experts, wetland scientists, landscapers, our town conservation agent, and basically the feedback that we got was that a plan had to include several things. One, mechanical removal, because it's such a large space, and that's going to include not only trying to cut out this stuff growing on the ground, but also cutting out and pulling out some of the stuff that's growing up into the trees. A lot of these vines are so old, you're gonna find vines that are like this size. They've been there for so long. So that's gonna require machinery to get it out. Once that part's done, it would be a very targeted spraying or sponging onto the bittersweet plants with Roundup. Just from a personal perspective, that was something that we wrestled with a lot in the committee because we're committed to the natural areas of the park, but it's kind of a trade-off. If we don't do it, what we heard from the experts was that we couldn't fight the fight without the herbicides. So that's in the plan, and it's going to have to be addressed over a 3 to 5 year period. The other thing is that we're going to have to try to find some sort of a coalition of the willing with the abutters to address the bittersweet that's adjacent to the park area as well. So because what happens is the bittersweet produces these really juicy berries that the birds eat and then drop the seeds, and then it spreads that way. So that's part of the plan as well. Any questions?
I see there's a bunch of ash trees in here too, which are all dying out because of the emerald ash borer. Is there a plan for removing those altogether and having it over with, because they're not going to last? You can see they're already half dead.
Yeah,
there are some dead ones too.
Like I said, we've got an inventory list of the trees and the conditions, and the idea would be that we would mark all the trees that are protected for, or identified for protection, and then where a tree falls in the construction area that's not marked for protection, it would get taken out, and I think that decision is going to come based on, location, condition, species. There'll be a number of criteria that go into determining that. But we've at least identified and inventoried the trees as they are now. So, any other questions? So just standing from this point, you can see that like we mentioned on the map earlier, the playground maximum footprint would be approximately 30 feet from the property line over there coming in, and then over to the infield fence there. The back end maximum footprint would be beyond I don't know if you can see it, but there's an old mulch pile that's sort of the second pile there. It would go out into that area. So, it's a larger maximum footprint than what we're on now. And it's sort of on all 4 sides. So depending on where the designer nets out, we could adjust that as need be. Any questions? Oh, real quick, Jim, you mentioned the relocation of the exercise equipment. Yep. So the plan is that we would have an interior walking trail. Currently on the plan, that trail is listed as being made of asphalt, but there's been a number of comments made about turning that into a natural crushed gravel type surface that would be more natural and more consistent with the park, and a permeable surface. At our July 6th meeting, that's one of the topics that we're going to discuss. So we're gathering costs for the permeable crusher fines, it's called, walking trail, and then we're going to discuss that at that point. Along the walking trail, we would relocate the existing exercise machines, and then add an additional 4 that would specifically target seniors, like stretching stations and what do you call the elliptical machines? I always forget that. And we could locate those just in general areas around the walking trail. Any questions? Yes.
Do we actually know the usage level of the exercise equipment? I think it's a great idea, but whenever I come here, I don't see anyone using it.
Right. We don't have any actual specific usage information for anything other than the baseball fields and the lacrosse fields. We have their estimated numbers. We are going to do, with the cooperation of the Chelmsford Police Department, is going to put a traffic monitor on the parking lot I think it's going to happen after the 4th, so in a couple of weeks. So we will at least have the first of baseline numbers for parking lot usage. And then we've also collected sound measurements, Dolby measurements for baseball games, for the pond, and then we're going to do the playground as well. That'll give us sort of, again, a baseline for what the noise levels are. And then we're going to also gather noise levels or sound levels at the Chelmsford Community Band Concert Summer Series that's going to happen later in July. So
Just curious, Bill. So the noise level with the playground, you're probably hitting that at peak time. Obviously, the community band's a peak time, but the baseball and lacrosse is peak in the spring. Haven't you missed that season?
no, we actually took a measurement on June 13th, which was the last day of their season, and we have a measurement that has 2 games going on at the same time. And just anecdotally, I expected that I'd come out here and it'd be, I had no idea. First off, we took the Board of Health sound measuring device to use it, so it'd be consistent with whatever other measurements the town has made. And then we stood at the very top of the hill to try and get a consistent reading area for the playground and the pond and whatnot. And it was between 50 and 60. The numbers are going to be in the master plan, but it was between 50 and 62, I think, Dolbys, which was pretty much like being. I looked at a scale. It was pretty much like being inside of a car and hearing the road noise. So it wasn't at the upper levels of what you would consider nuisance noise. That's anecdotal. That's kind of for whoever reads the chart to make that determination. But that was at least my determination. I'm sorry?
Was there any measurements taken by the abutters?
We haven't, but that's something that we could certainly do. Yeah, no, we haven't. So if that's something that you guys wanted to do, we'd be more than happy to do that.
Just seems the smart thing to do.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. That would make sense. Okay. Any other questions? So just to reiterate, the playground, the process would be that we've defined the budget, an overall budget, and defined the overall footprint, and we've defined the general expectations that we have for what would be in the playground. Then the town is going to have to decide how it's going to get funded and when it's going to get built. And then whenever that happens, the bid process would start, and then the design part would be part of that bid process. Great. So why don't we just stay here since it's nice and shady, and we can talk about the athletic fields and talk about the pavilions. And while I'm doing that, let me hand out. Yes.
Consider if the park is going to be done in stages and the playground will be first, you're going to start to encroach on the baseball area. And so what will you do for baseball next year if you encroach on that area?
Yeah, that's going to have to be something that's going to be determined in a construction schedule, and that's really going to be on the town to determine that. But I mean, not interfering with the organizational stakeholders' games in the park is going to have to be a big consideration. So it's a good question. So just in general, one of the criteria that we had and goals that we had for creating the master plan was to open up the internal views of the park. And this plan, you may notice that the fields are flip-flopped. So the lacrosse field is currently in the back, and the baseball fields are sort of in the middle. This plan calls to have the lacrosse field flipped to the front of the park, and then have the baseball fields flipped to the back. So the thinking there was that moving the backstops and the dugouts to the back of the park would obviously put the visual block of those things closer to the tree line, so you could see front to back better and side to side better. One of the considerations that we've recently learned is that we're going to need to put some type of a safety netting on both sides of the lacrosse field located in the front on the plan to keep the balls from going into the walking areas and then going into the playground as well. So we've got side screens on the sides of the lacrosse field now, and then the open areas here. Any questions on why we flip-flop the fields? And if you'll notice on this, on the plan, the larger community band pavilion is proposed, and it's roughly in the middle there of the infield for this baseball field, and then pointed out towards the rear end of the pond, sort of towards that soccer goal that's out there now. And it's important to point out too that the soccer goals, there won't be any soccer goals. It'll just be movable lacrosse goals, the smaller goals, and those will be put away when they're not in use. So there's one big pavilion here at size 30 by 40 to accommodate the Chelmsford Community Band, which Dave is here. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add about the community band stand or anything?
I love that location. I mean, it works really well for us.
Okay. So we've worked with and gotten feedback from the community band on location and which sort of sizes and things would work best for them. The idea of the community band stand would be that, like everything else in the park, it's a dawn to dusk facility. We'd have internal lighting, but the internal lighting would be only for like breaking down instruments and stuff. It's not to provide lighting for nighttime concerts. We'd have 2 110-volt plugs that would accommodate their amplification. And Dave, would you want to speak to the amplification needs of the band and kind of how you guys use your...
Yeah, currently we perform on the Common, which is just an open grassy area. We have no physical structure around where we play right now. And we use amplification so that we can hear each other and so that the audience can hear us. With a structure like the one that's been proposed here, the hard floor and the rigid roof will help focus the sound towards the audience, and we will be able to use a lot less amplification in that case, and the audience should get a better sound actually. The second outlet is just for the lighting that we do need. You know, as the sun goes down, we can't see the music, we can't see the director, so we need some lighting to do our performances even while there's still twilight. So.
And then one of the ideas that you had brought up in earlier meeting, and I think also in your letter to the board for the public input session, was the idea of having food trucks at your concerts. Yeah. So one of the costs that we were collecting for discussion at our July 6th meeting was to put 110 outlets at the top of the parking lot there for food trucks to be able to plug into, so they wouldn't have to run generators. So that's just one more discussion point that we have. Barry?
Question for you, Dave. Do you happen to know what the power requirements are for all your equipment?
We currently run about 1,500 watts of lights and a few hundred watts for the audio equipment. I've never measured the audio equipment.
Yeah. Okay, because that might be a good thing just to verify before going forward, to make sure. I mean, that's a pretty low number, and so you should be okay if that's true.
Can I just clarify one thing real quick? So the band has actually provided us with a pretty detailed list of what their amplification and wattage needs would be. So that's going to get presented at the next meeting as well. So that's kind of how we got to that 2 110-volt outlet number. Jim?
Is it okay to ask directly to Dave, or
is that okay with you?
Yeah. So the structure that's proposed is 1,200 square feet. Are you playing all the venues that you play at now? Do you have 1,200 square foot structures at all of them?
No, like you said, it's just open grass.
And how many times a year do you play here in Chelmsford?
We play a total of about 10 to 12 concerts a year. Some of those are indoor concerts during the winter. In the summer, we play on the Common for the 3rd of July, and that won't change. We play on the 4th of July in the parade. That won't change. And then we do 6 more concerts on the Common currently, and we'd like to relocate those 6 concerts here. And those are on Tuesday evenings for 6 weeks in July and August.
So that's what you would be doing here. And those are from 7 to 8:30 still?
Roughly 7 to 8:30. And as the season gets later and the light dies sooner, we end sooner.
Okay. Can you, when the concerts get done, is it just 8:30? You guys stop breaking down and traffic starts to just dump out of the park now in Center Common? I've been to quite a few shows. I've seen it just kind of stops at 8:30. You guys go about your business breaking down, and then everybody kind of empties out. Is that would stay the same here?
Yeah.
And I I also want to point out that we reached out to the Chelmsford schools, to the person that's responsible for the performance and theatrical departments for the schools, just to kind of gauge an interest if it was something that they would be interested in putting on performances, again, in a dawn to dusk type time frame. And they thought it was a great opportunity. And obviously it would need a lot more discussion, or there'd have to be more discussion to determine if they would use it or not. But one of the recommendations that the master plan is going to include is that the Chelmsford Facilities Department would be responsible for scheduling. So there's going to need to be a master schedule, obviously, of not only the athletic fields, which is currently scheduled by the schools, but also if we do add a performance pavilion, multi-use pavilion, that would need to be scheduled as well. And I think it's important to also point out that we've got a commitment from the Chelmsford Community Band for the 6 to 8 performances in their summer series. But I think realistically, we have to consider the impact on the park and the neighbors, because we're in essence creating a new venue, a new performance venue in the town, and a really nice one, I think, frankly. So usage will increase because of it, and there will more than likely be other people looking to use the pavilion for performances as well.
So with that
Yes.
Sorry, sir.
Go ahead. Follow up.
With that being said, Bill, the print shows basically it looks like the people that will be sitting for these performances are going to be sitting in the outfield of one of the baseball fields.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be, right? Because it's right there in the corner of the pavilion. And then you've got the lacrosse field. So I'm assuming that both of those fields are not going to be able to be used with all these performances that you're talking about potentially could happen here.
During the performances, right?
Yes.
Right. So that would be, again, that's why there's such a need for one central master schedule to schedule these things, right?
Were those organizations consulted about the time that they would be?
Yes.
And they were okay with it?
So we reached out to, just to give you some background, we reached out to over 30 different community organizations, town departments, just anybody that might potentially be a stakeholder. And that's an ongoing process. Just to give some clarification, we actually reached out to the Chelmsford Hockey Association this week after some feedback from the public input session. And we surveyed each of them to see what their needs and uses would be of the park. And anybody that was willing to talk to us provided some information. I mean, that's how we got the community band to engage in the process as well. So I feel like we've done our due diligence in trying to find potential users and trying to identify what the issues may be with scheduling and anything else maintenance-wise for the features. Yes, sir.
I wanted to clarify something that I thought that I learned at the input session earlier this week, but I'm not entirely clear. And that is, although anyone or a wide range of activities can apply to use the bandstand, you can put noise restrictions on it, can you not? We don't have to allow all uses. We have to allow uses without discrimination for things that don't get into the nuisance level. But if I want to clarify, if some particular organization staged an event whose noise level was too high, we could tell them, sorry, we can't give you another permit for an event like that. Is that the case?
I wish I could answer your question. I don't know. I would suspect that it would be, and I'd hope that there would be a representative from the town or DPW here to be able to answer that question, and there's not, unfortunately. What I heard the town manager say at the public input session was that you could put restrictions on facility use, but that those restrictions were sort of subject to the whim of time, so they could be modified if public will changed down the road. So I wouldn't want to say that it would be definitively, nothing more than 70 dBs of noise, because, we may all go deaf in 20 years and it may turn to 90. You know what I mean? So
yes, I do understand, and I think it's appropriate for you to bring that up, because you can't promise what will happen in 20 or 30 years, but usually the concerns about issues like that have to do with authorizing a small tax, let's say, with the knowledge that down the road the tax can be doubled, tripled, and quadrupled without your being able to prevent it. But I really think, knowing this neighborhood, assuming that it remains relatively stable, that all abutters would be supported by their neighbors. If sound problems got out of hand, we would insist with the town fathers that they crack down on the offenders. Because in my view, it's great that there might be 6 concerts a year from the community band. I would think those would be on the loudest edge of what we ought to allow. But I could see other events, such as the drama club at the high school, which held outdoor 30-minute to 45-minute scene performances when my children were both active in it. It is not flat by the side of the science pond. It's an uncomfortable location. Maybe that would be something that could be used here. However, I don't think that the sound from the drama club, which was never amplified, would reach even to that fence. So it might be that we could have 30 or 40 events, but if all of them were kept to a sound level that was respectful to the abutters, then I would see that as a good thing, not as a bad thing.
You raise good points, and I agree. What I'd like to suggest is that at our July 6th meeting, that we include a discussion of potentially including a recommendation for incorporating those types of restriction expectations into the plan, but ultimately, we have to leave it up to the town and what they decide. But we will include that expectation.
Just a recommendation before you go putting anything on master plan and a recommendation. I think the first step is to check with the town manager to make sure. I'm not sure you can segregate the arts like that and start to draw lines on what's allowed and what isn't. I'm not an expert, but I don't know how you can say yes to the community band, and then if somebody wants to come in and do a comedy show that might not be appropriate for a family neighborhood, or they want to do a rock concert, something like that, how you can separate those people out and say no to them, but yes to the community band, or yes to the high school performing arts. Right. Somebody who wants to come in from a private organization that wants to rent the pavilion, you can say no to it. I mean, it's a question for the town manager, certainly, but I think you need to get that answer before you go making recommendations on it.
Actually, it's not anything particular, and I will pre-disclose I'm an attorney, but I am not giving legal advice as I stand here. You can contract anything, as long as you're not discriminating based on the classes that the Supreme Court has decided are protected classes. So if Black Student Union from ULowell wanted to come in and do a music thing, we couldn't turn them down based on the basis of their color. However, if they told us that their music would be above the DB level on the contract then prevails because it's blind. So you can contract anything you want.
So to that point, you're opening up the town to a whole new standard of risk.
Absolutely.
Changing the park to a performance venue changes the risk factor, and I think you need to have a discussion with the town manager on whether or not he wants that.
But it's a lower risk value.
That's your opinion.
What the police have told us is that the biggest risk value within places like this is enclosed structures that they cannot look into because of the prevalence of heroin use in the area. Because then you provide a protected place where people can shoot up, can sleep, whatever. The police have told us that that is their main issue in terms of safety. They wanted clear sight lines from the parking lot so that they could see all around the park, and we're putting cameras, and we'll have to add an extra server at the police station in order for the park to be monitored. The kind of use that you're talking about doesn't draw a whole lot of controversy. You don't hear a whole lot about it in the papers. So the risk, as much as you're stating it, is fairly low compared to the other risks that the police have helped us consider.
Just a couple of clarifications too. So in the budget itself, we have a number of security improvements. One of those would be adding security cameras that would either be monitored by the town or DPW or by the Chelmsford Police Department dispatch. We have three cameras budgeted. We would, once we have the final plan in place, we'd go to the Chief Spinney and ask for his recommendation on placement. But just in thinking out loud, we're probably going to want to do one over on that corner, closer to the fire station, which is where the hardscape area would be, with a single basketball goal. One in the front of the playground, and probably one in the back of the playground to cover off on the fields, and as well if the pavilion is in place as well. And also the other security improvement that we have is moving the utilities underground. So the fiber and the power would all be underground, so you wouldn't have the overhead wires. And back to your question, Jim, I think it's a good point, and I'll make a point to reach out to the town manager this week before our July 6th meeting to get his feedback on usage restrictions and the town's willingness to not only maintain that, but to accept that risk of potential legal issues from limiting people. Any other? Yes.
So I'm at 6 Thomas Drive, so the one right behind the right where like the band station and the park's going to be extending. So I didn't realize there was an amplifier, so I thought the whole point of it was that there would be like a place for the band to play, and the audience was going to be right in front of, which is what we discussed last Tuesday's meeting. So the sound would be going towards the audience, but now if we're talking about amplifiers, like it feels like that's going to be...
The amplifiers are pointed at the audience as well.
It's faced out?
Yeah, they would never not be any sound projected towards the boundary of the park.
Okay. And I just feel like if its main purpose is for a band, like band projects music, why do we need to amplify it? I'm sorry, I'm late to the party. I didn't even realize there was an amplifier until this meeting.
If it's okay, I'd like to have Dave answer, because he has more knowledge than I do about it.
Yeah, the band consists of a great variety of instruments, woodwinds, brass, percussion, and they can't all be heard at the same level at the same time. So we use amplification out on the common just so that we get a good balanced sound. And with a structure like we're talking about here, we would need less of that, but we would still need some. And we also use amplification just for the voice announcements between numbers and things like that. So we would still be using some amplification for balance, for getting a good sound for the audience, but we're not trying to create a louder sound than what the band normally sounds like, just to balance the sound.
Okay. And you guys are currently performing at the Commons then? Right. Is that correct?
Right. So they do a performance on July 3rd. On the 4th as well, or?
The 3rd is a static concert on the Common in the midst of the whole street fair that's going on July 3rd. On the 4th, we participate in the parade, which starts up at the police station and comes down Route 4 and ends near the Common. And then the 6 Tuesdays after that, we will be performing by ourselves on the Common, which is a good chance to see what the effect would be here, because it would be a very similar performance to what we would be doing here.
And so we, at that subsequent summer series that you guys will have, we hope to do a head count so that we can kind of estimate the number of cars, thinking, if there's 100 people, then that's probably 50 cars or somewhere in that range. And then as well, as I mentioned before, taking a Dolby reading, a dB reading for the sound levels too, to get an idea of what the sound levels are there. Any other questions?
How do you monitor? You guys have like a specialist then that's doing the sound barrier for the trees? Like, how do you measure how much sound the new setup's going to project?
I don't follow the question. I'm sorry. Could you?
Yeah. So like you guys are putting up a new barrier for brush and trees and stuff, right, to block the sound and everything more than what it is, or are we leaving it like this?
It would be more, yes, we have a sound mitigation landscaping plan that would basically be from roughly the start of the playground over there back to here. So we've created. It's on the plan.
Okay, yeah, it's on the one on the plan that's basically going where it's extending out.
So
it's coming to my house.
It starts here, right about at the front, and then back to the back. So here's the mulch pile, which is right there. So it's roughly about somewhere in that area.
Okay.
And the idea here is that we would create a berm raise the land up, and then to create some type of a landscaping, sound mitigating type landscape plan that would help cut down the noise from traveling back, both from the playground, the baseball fields, as well as the multi-use pavilions. We've used arborvitae to create a budget with, but the idea would be that we would work with Weston Nurseries, the tree committee, and then anybody else that would be interested in talking to us to help develop a sound landscaping plan, so that, you know, for instance, one of the issues might be that if we use our arborvitae and something happens to attack an arborvitae and it just decimates the whole thing, we've lost all that. So we want to create a plan that's, you know, as sort of stacked and sustainable as possible. Thank you very much.
Do we know how close we're planting the arborvitae together? I know we just planted some we just had our yard redone and we did some arborvitae, and there's like big gaps.
Yeah.
So
the way that we got to the budget number was it was about 3.5 feet apart from each other, but we also had a mix of different heights. So in an area where we might have a more open space, we might use taller trees so that they would grow in quicker. But then where areas where we've got some more established stuff, it might be lower. So it's really just it's a plan to be determined later. But at least we have a budget number that we can work with, and then an idea of kind of what the landscape plan would look like.
So for 8 Thomas Drive, Mary Ellen and John, so it doesn't look like that's going to extend past theirs. Do we know what the volume level is going to be for them, since they don't have that barrier like I do neighboring them?
We don't. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that we've conducted a full sound study and that we know kind of what the sound levels are going to be at different areas of the park. We don't have that that information, and I don't think we could really honestly prepare that kind of information. The idea is that we're trying to create opportunities to block the noise where we see that noise is either already an issue or could be a larger issue. The area beyond here has a pretty densely packed tree growth in through here, so I think we're going to be okay. But you know, if we get no, but we are going to try to get rid of all of the bittersweet, so that if we do end up with a situation where we have to remove some of the stuff because it's dead, because a lot of this stuff you can't really tell what's dead and what's not because the bittersweet's growing in it and it looks like it's alive. But if we do get into that situation, we're going to have to, you know, create a longer sound mitigating plan.
Do we know when the timeline is for removing the dead stuff and what you guys are planning to remove in the first place?
Yeah, so we included in our recommendation that the playground be a first priority. We believe that the town will try to seek the funding at fall town meeting for the playground part, but the town's going to have to, the DPW specifically, is going to have to be responsible for creating the implementation schedule for the entire plan. So they're going to have to really take a look at it and see what they can, number one, what can be funded, and then number two, how does their existing construction schedule sort of fit with this as well. And
we just don't know yet when the tree removal process will begin.
Correct. But I would expect that if we're going to prep this site, like if we were able to get funding for the playground, right, we're going to want to prep this site and clear all this out over the winter so that we don't lose playtime in the playground. And I would expect that this area obviously would be included in that removal process. So they're going to want to start the plan to start dealing with the bittersweet and to get the
so as early as this winter?
Yes. And then probably starting, ideally, optimistically speaking, starting the playground construction sometime in the spring, early spring. We'd also, just while we're here talking about it, we also have a community build component in the playground structure installation. So what that would do is that we would have a weekend or two where we'd have volunteers come out and under the supervision of the playground contractors, install the actual equipment. And the benefit of that is, one, it brings the community into the project, but it also extends the budget about 15 to 18%. So then you can take that 15 to 18% and then roll it back into the cost for structures. So you really get more value, more bang for your buck doing it that way. Any questions?
In an effort to try to balance out the voice a little bit, I just want to let it be known that some of us abutters do appreciate loud rock music, so not, rock on. But also, I will live in the house right across the street from the parking lot. We have no sound barrier, and sometimes at night we can even hear just people having a conversation in the playground here. You know, just people talking. We hear it over there. It's really not that bad. It's really, you know, I can't imagine, you know, even having the bandstand, having it be so loud that it's gonna, you know, be disturbing. Maybe it's all the rock music has kind of made me deaf a little bit. It's, you know, we have the, you know, all the noise from the cars and the motorcycles that go up and down the road constantly, and when our windows are open, that can be a bit of a nuisance. But you know, you block it out. And, you know, but it's really not too bad. I can't imagine it being that loud, disturbing.
Thank you. I will say too that you know, we surveyed the Chelmsford Police Department about their considerations for the master plan. And one of the first things they said was they really wanted to maintain the open view from the street to the back of the playground. So in terms of putting any kind of sound mitigating trees or anything in that front view of the park, that's not included in the plan for that reason. This is specifically that the police asked that they could be able to see in the back.
Yeah, I mean, we hear everything happening. You know, it's not you know, anything that we don't know what's going on. It's not anything to complain about.
Right.
Because there's been, like, you know, dance playing over here. I think even last year. I think there was a fundraiser, right, for this effort that was here last year or the year before. Yeah. So and we heard it, you know, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't really anything disturbing at all. So.
The proposal calls for, your budget looks like $100,000 basically for the pavilion.
Roughly, including the storage space for the to be added into the DPW.
So my question is, if hypothetically you didn't get funding, if town meeting said we're not going to give $100,000 for the structure, does the community band still have interest in playing here without a structure?
That's what Dave said. Yeah. Just and from a funding perspective, I think, you know, there's if the town didn't want to support that with funds from town meeting or funds from the CPC or whatever that implementation schedule, funding schedule would be, you know, there's always the opportunity to seek out, and that's one of the charges for the advisory board, to seek out cost sharing opportunities, albeit through, you know, we agreed as a board to allow corporate sponsorships and obviously volunteer donations and things like that. So that's one of the goals that we had in creating this plan, that, you know, if once we got it finished, that it could sort of sit on the shelf, and that if there was a body that could seek out other alternative ways to cost share, then that's what we would do. So we're trying to at least build that flexibility into the plan itself. Questions? So while we have the benefit of shade, I just want to reiterate a couple of things. One, the current plan calls for the lacrosse field to go forward and the baseball field to move back. To do that, and then to wrap the entire interior area with a walking trail ringed with exercise circuit machines. The material that the path is made of is still up for discussion, and that'll be decided at our July 6th meeting. The edge of the forest there in the back, based on the current configuration, is going to need to be thinned out some, and we don't have the trees flagged right now of which ones would be taken out or which ones would be saved, but it is in the plan. So what we would like to do is to sort of, when the time comes to build these things, it's going to be sort of a give and take on which ones need to be protected and which things can be tweaked and moved. For instance, the large oak tree that you see here that has on the outside of the playground fence, it sort of has a large tree that's been limb that's been removed. That's actually right in the middle of the maximum playground footprint fence line. So, you know, obviously we can't run a fence through it, nor would we want to. So we're going to have to adjust the plan accordingly. And we're going to have those kinds of decisions on a smaller scale kind of throughout the park, especially in the back here, when we're trying to orient the walking trail.
My assumption is that you'll be working with Katie from Conservation as you go through the tree line, making those designations?
Yes.
Okay.
One of our recommendations is that we would work with the Conservation Commission and the town conservation agent to not only do that flag the individual trees and to work with those, but also flag and mark the wetlands as well, especially when we're conducting the bittersweet exercises. And the area back over there, the area over here, and then on the other side of the pond as well.
We have some pretty dense bittersweet undergrowth back there, so yeah, okay.
But it's also kind of adjacent to wetland areas, so it's going to be important that we have those clearly marked, because some of the stuff you can't use in wetland areas. So, and that's all going to be part of the detailed maintenance plan that we would charge the advisory board with creating.
And that brings me to another question just about the berm here and the landscaping throughout. Considerations, I'm sure you are speaking with Katie about this, but consideration should be made for the type of chemicals, if any, are required for the surfaces or whatever, during the winter, whatever maintenance. The Conservation Commission does have restrictions on some of those materials,
right?
Or
Absolutely.
Chemicals.
Right. There's two basic types of herbicides that can be used, and one of them is a little less effective but a little kinder to the environment, and I think that's it's Roundup basically, and that's the one that we would recommend using. Bob?
You focus totally on bittersweet. There's plenty of other invasive species around here too. Japanese barberry, probably Norway maples, Japanese bamboo. Are they part of the landscaping plan, and is that part of the landscaping that's going to happen?
Yes. So it's a great question. So the Friends of Roberts Field has been working on trying to improve and enhance the natural areas of the park for 3 to 5 years now. We would expect that the maintenance plan would include an overall goal of removing invasives and then actually enhancing and adding in native flowering, non-invasive plants into the areas where we can. So I'll give you a good example. In the pond, on the far corner of the pond, there's Phragmites growing in there, which is sort of a reedy kind of tall structure with kind of a wispy grass seed top. It's a beautiful plant, but the problem is it's incredibly invasive, and in a situation like we have there, it's going to, in 10 to 15 years, it's going to just take over the pond, and we're not going to have a pond, we're going to have a grassy field. So one of the goals is in that plan to identify the different invasives, and then to have volunteers, have the town, have wherever we can, take opportunities to have those things removed, and then and at the same time be adding back in native flowering, seeding, nutting, very very beneficial plants for the wildlife habitat.
Yeah, I've lived around here long enough to remember where the pollinator garden is. It used to be just a solid expanse of purple loosestrife. It just disappeared. I don't know if there was some mitigation from the conservation committee or what, but was that an active program to get rid of that purple loosestrife? Do you know?
I'd like to be able to take credit for that, but I can't. What I think happened is that the state released a particular beetle that attacks and eats that non-native loosestrife, and there used to be a lot of it on the pond shore, and I think the beetle started eating at it a couple of years ago, and it's been pretty much taken out here. So, yeah. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking to encourage. Any other questions?
I have something just to add. So I'm from the West Coast, and on the West Coast, Earth Day is like a really big volunteer, get people to go and plant things. I tried really hard to find something like that here, and I couldn't find anything within 20 miles or so. And so maybe that's something that we look into, is having the community put back, building, or not building, but planting plants and stuff. We might be able to get more volunteers that way, just because, it's a perfect excuse when it's Earth Day weekend. People are always wanting to give back to the community even more, so it might get us more volunteers, and can't complain about free labor. So especially
clean up on Earth Day every year. Every year there's a town cleanup, so there are things going on during Earth Day.
Yeah, but I was just looking for something. They have like a huge community. There's like 200 people. I'm not saying anything like that, but it's like a huge go and you plant. People have like sticks. Each plant has like a flag of one color, and you have to go and find the spot that has the same flag. You dig a hole, you plant it. I mean, it doesn't have to be that big, but it might be worth looking into since we're going to do like a volunteer thing anyways, just incorporating it into Earth Day weekend, because people might be actually like looking for something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion, and it ties in with some of the things I was talking about with the Friends of Roberts Field. We've kind of done projects somewhat sporadically. We try to do at least 1 or 2 major projects a year for the last 3 to 4 years. You know, we redid the corner over there and cleared out Pollinator Park on the corner of Westford and Old Westford, and added in 4 large gardens in there, and then we're continuing to add into that. We created the new garden over here adjacent to the skate shack. We created and maintained the trails over here. But my point in saying that is that there is an organization that's here that is looking for volunteers, and I would encourage you to look not only on Facebook, friendsofrobertsfield.org, but also the Friends of Roberts Field on Facebook group, but also the friendsofrobertsfield.org is a website that we try to keep updated with different activities and things that are going on. And if there's any kind of things that we're not doing that you have an idea for, we're more than happy to get behind it and help you to organize and to get that going. So, and I fully expect that those types of activities are going to get larger and more encompassing, because Roberts Field specifically, just like a lot of places in town, has a really rich history of volunteer activities, you know. And I think as much as we can, especially because it's a community park, engage and involve the community in taking care of it and maintaining it, the better it'll be. And I'll give you an example. You know, when we first started talking about creating the nature walking trails, we were concerned that we'd open it up to misuse, you know, and there'd be a lot of trash and there'd just be more hassle than not. And I am happy to say that whenever I sort of randomly walk on the nature trails now, I very rarely pick up litter, you know, and I don't usually see, you know, misuse things that are going on there. I've seen one in 3 years. And I think that's because, you know, the community has started to use it and appreciate it, and I think people, you know, take care of it. So I think that's hopefully going to be the same kind of environment and community that we build with this new master plan. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So while we're in the shade, we can take a walk over there if you guys want to look, but one of the big ticket items that we have in the master plan is to dredge the pond. And the reason why we have that, and that's about $100,000 to $130,000 to dredge. And the cost of dredging is part of the cost, but there's also a lot of permitting costs involved as well. Not only from the local level, but you've got state and then even federal permitting for some of the work. We got feedback from a wetland scientist. I mean, you can see the pond is shallow, and it's gotten shallower over the last few years. We got feedback from a wetland scientist that within 15 to 20 years, 25 years, that the pond's going to be completely filled in with sediment, and that it will be basically Phragmites, and then any wet spots that are there are going to be filled with algae. So it's going to be a big stinky Phragmites filled field. So if that happens, we end up losing skating. Obviously, we lose the habitat, we lose the beauty that we have now with the pond adjacent to the park. So we felt like it was something that, even though it has a high ticket cost, that it's something that we need to build into the plan. And it may not be something that's done right now. For instance, last year would have probably been the best year to do it because it was so dry. It would have been easy to get excavators in there to do the work, but we just weren't at the point of being able to say we wanted to do it. Moving forward, we hope that, you know, we've got this on the plan so that the town can sort of build that into their contingency plans, and then work on it when it's driest, right? When it's dry. So that's that. Any other questions? One stop that I want to make, there's a stake that we placed out here where Barry Jefferson, myself, and Jim Martin tried to take a level indication of where the lacrosse field would, how much the grade would need to be increased with the lacrosse field moved into the front. So if we could just relocate out there, that'll be the last stop that we make on the tour. But if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And we can walk around if you want, but that's our last planned stop. So, any questions while we're here? Great. So if you'll take a look at the map, you can see that here's the lacrosse field, here's the upper parking lot, right? And you can see that the top of the lacrosse field, and I don't know the exact dimensions, but it's within that area that starts to be sort of flat and before it starts to slope down, right? And if you look at sort of where we are in terms of the lacrosse field, it starts on the left-hand side of the garage building, and then it extends out to just beyond the skate shack. So we're somewhere in probably about the 40-yard line, and not quite in the middle of the field, but sort of cheating towards the back edge. So one of the questions that the committee has had is, how much the lacrosse field has to be level for play. The baseball fields have to be somewhat level in the outfield to play, although both of these organizations are going to use these fields specifically for their younger leagues, so the under 12 leagues. So it's kids learning the sports that are out here playing, right? So there's not going to be a ton of fastballs thrown at the lacrosse field, and there's not going to be a ton of balls hit out beyond the infield, really, in the spring. But in the fall, they'll use these baseball fields for their 12-year-olds, so there'll be some need for outfield in the fall. But one of our concerns was the amount of material that it was going to take and the impact on the park for fill to get the lacrosse field leveled. So the exercise that we undertook a couple days ago was to try to put an idea to that. And so we did a water leveling exercise where we put a tub of a bucket of water up at the very top, ran a hose down, and then lifted the hose up, and then that would help us to find sort of the natural level of where the water is there to where the water is here. So that's where this line is here. So this line is the exercise from the water leveling exercise, right? So the way to interpret this is that if that's correct, then we're going to need this much fill from there to roughly the edge of the parking lot coming down. Casey, you had a question?
A little over 2 feet.
So that assumes completely level, correct?
Correct.
So looking on lacrosse regulations, a field can be level at 1.5% slope, which is over the course of 100 feet. You gain or lose 1.5 feet. This is about 180 feet long, so that's going to be almost 3 feet. Yeah, that's going to be almost 3 feet that you can gain or lose, with still being considered level.
Okay.
So you don't need to have the field to come up to here.
So 180 feet wide.
Wide.
May I add a comment to that? Because Jim Martin our arborist was bringing this out. Up at the top there, you've got ledge.
Yes.
So you're not going to be able to have much in the way of turf without getting something underneath that. So you got to add a little bit to what Bill was talking about.
Yeah, so if you raise there, you might have to raise here, but the overall idea is just that you don't have to be this here when you're this here. You can be like that and people will still see it as level because it's 1.5%. You're only gaining 1.5 feet over 100 feet, but it gives you enough to say you don't need this much fill, you know.
All right, well,
just the idea.
That's good to know. The other exercise that we did was we took a portable transit, which is basically a little telescope that has a level line in it, and marked the level line to the top of the grassy parking lot area in front of the parking lot, and that was there. So just for what it's worth, a level area with the front of the parking lot would be either somewhere in this area, right? The other issue that we're coming up against is, and this was discussed at the public input session, was trying to fit in the 2 baseball fields as well as the lacrosse field, and that's something that'll be discussed at the July 6th meeting. But there's been discussions of trying to kind of push the lacrosse field back some and overlapping the baseball fields, and that's something that'll be discussed at the meeting as well.
Given the engineer's input with the 1.5%, there's still going to be some type of a 1.5 to 2 feet difference in elevation, right? Is the plan to taper that into the ball fields, or is there going to be a retaining wall, or what's the thought?
Howard Stein Hudson and the DPW have both said that they wouldn't need to use retaining walls. That's their opinions. And they've described the slopes as trying to connect things as with a gentle slope. That's been the extent of it. We've asked for more detailed information on topography to try to see how this stuff actually works out, and that's kind of why we went to this measurement here, just to kind of give an idea because we could stand at the top of the field and look down and see roughly how much fill it's going to take, but we wanted some kind of a gauge for our own satisfaction to see where it's going to be. Casey?
So also with the distance we have between the lacrosse field or the multi-use field and the baseball fields, we can also increase the slopes. That doesn't have to be 1.5%. That can be up 3-5%, which is still very gentle. And that can gain you either 3 feet, 5 feet over 100 feet. And what you'll notice is that from there to there, it might look like a lot because it drops off a lot here, but it's really only 4 to 6 feet given aerial topography, which accuracy, but it's definitely doable without retaining walls. If you have 30 feet of, I don't want to get too engineering here, but if you have 30 feet of 3% slope, you'll gain a lot of distance down without looking at a hill. It's gentle slopes. You guys will see a slope and think it's a lot, but for drainage purposes, level is never actually going to be level. Level is always gaining or losing something. So where you see the lacrosse field has to be level, it's really going to be 1.5%, but it's going to look level. Where you see the baseball field is going to be level, it's going to be 1.5%, but it's still going to look level. You know what I'm saying? So in between those two fields, and you've talked to baseball about it, the edge of the outfield can also be sloped up because they don't believe anyone's going to be there. So the topography is going to work. That's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, one of the considerations we talked to is that if we did do that, then we're sort of building in limitations to the baseball outfield to accommodate that slope to fit the two. So I mean, those are all discussions that are going to happen in the committee meeting. And to comment on the the slope between the lacrosse field and the baseball fields. I mean, if you look at the distance on the plan, there's not really enough room in there, at least from my mind, in my eye, to create a gentle slope. I mean, it's less than 20 feet, right, between the two currently. Pushing those together could address that, and then sloping the field could address that too. But there's the other side of it that's building a limitation into the design from the start. So all stuff that needs to be discussed in the committee meeting. Any other questions or comments or about the field or the grades? The other thing to keep in mind too is that with the lacrosse field up here, there's been safety concerns about pass balls going into the parking lot, and then as well shots on goal going off towards the playground. So the other thing to consider too is that if you do raise the grade, you've got a higher lacrosse field. So we're absolutely going to have to put up safety screens on both sides to keep the balls out of the park, out of the playground, and then out of the walking trail as well on both sides. Again, something that needs to be discussed at a committee meeting. Any other questions or comments? One other thing I wanted to point out, we've got a hardscape play area that would basically square off that parking area behind the fire station, sort of to the left of where the trucks are now. We'd have a one single basketball pole goal, sort of on the edge of where the parking lot is now, far enough away from the garage so that the access to the field, vehicle access to the field, is still available, because we're going to close off vehicle access from the upper and lower parking lot, so people can't drive out onto the field now. If you notice, there's some ruts out there. This will be the only way in, and that's primarily for med flight usage, when they land helicopters here, when they have to get people to the hospital, or for maintaining the fields. And that's pretty much it. If anybody's interested, we can walk into the back there. I don't know, we've got a sort of a forest loop. You can kind of see the nature trail. We're going to have to reconfigure that to make that work with the existing trees, but that's all identified in the plan as well. But that's pretty much the site plan.
On the hardscape is not only going to be the half-court basketball, there's also going to be more like middle school painted stuff like Foursquare and Hopscotch and things like that, and taking off on the theme of a fire station. So we're going to be tying the painting of that half-court area into the fact that it's right near the fire station. And again, just trying to blend things appropriately here.
And the nice thing about that too is that the idea there is that it would tie in the fire station with the park. So with the hardscape games like Foursquare or Hopscotch or whatever could be done by the Chelmsford High School art departments, and they could use firefighter type drawings like hoses or ladders or specifically. So it ties the park, it ties the station into the park, which I think is a nice thing to do, and gives kids a reason to kind of see the firefighters. And I will say that the firefighters have expressed, the individual firefighters at the station have expressed some concerns about the ball being so close, the basketball being so close to their trucks, but when we explained that the goal would be where it is, I think they felt better about it.
And the other thing is it gives teenagers who are not necessarily desiring of staying with their parents and younger sibs while they're doing something, a far enough space away from them that they feel apart, but still an open sightline that their parents can watch them and watch what they're up to. And so it stretches the age of the use of the park. Normally what we get for teenagers is them hanging out in the parking lot, listening to music and drinking or whatever. And we'd like a little more appropriate use.
Well, let me clarify that too. We actually surveyed the Chelmsford Police Department and the Chelmsford Fire Department to get a gauge of their emergency response calls to the park, and there were less than a handful of emergency calls from either to the police or to the fire department. The Chelmsford Police Department maintains a very strong presence here. They park their cars here quite a bit, so there's generally every other day at least on average there's a car either driving through here or coming through here, and I think that really helps. And they've committed to maintain that type of presence at the park. So we feel good about the monitoring and the effect that it'll have on maintaining or eliminating misuse. And that's all going to be in the master plan too, so you'll see the exact numbers of what their responses were. Any other questions? Well, I don't see any other questions, so I just wanted to thank you all for coming out. And if you guys have any other questions, all of the information that we've presented here, along with all the listing of meetings and videos of meetings, are all available at robertsfield.org. I encourage you to come out to our July 6th meeting. That's the meeting that we'll be voting on the features and the uses and locations. And then on July 18th, we're going to vote on the final master plan that'll basically be all of the documentation and all the expectations and things that we've collected and included. And then we'll present that master plan to the Board of Selectmen on the 31st. Hopefully by the 6th, and then maybe by the 18th, we'll have a better idea of the funding and implementation schedule. But like I said, that's really in the town's purview at this point. So we'll do what we can. I'd like to encourage you, if you would, to take a comment. It's a one-question comment card. If you'd just let us know your thoughts, good, bad, and different. We love the feedback. I've even included some backs that you can write on if that would help. So thank you all again very much. I really appreciate your attention and time coming out, and look forward to presenting a plan for you. Thank you.